In 1824, the Burmese Empire was at war with the British Empire. Early in the year, Burma's seasoned soldiers, led by the confident Maha Bandula, gained ground, threatening British-held Chittagong and eyeing Calcutta. British forces were defeated at Ramu in May 1824, but Maha Bandula had to retreat due to unfolding events in Burma. To avoid jungle combat, British forces launched a May assault on Rangoon via the sea, with the Burmese retreating to fortified countryside positions. The Burmese king recalled Maha Bandula to retake Rangoon with 30,000 veteran soldiers, but poorly equipped, they made the mistake of a head-on assault against the British. Using Congreve rockets, the British devastated the Burmese forces, resulting in a massacre. Regrouping his reduced forces at Danabur, Maha Bandula launched a counterattack with elephants, but British Congreve rockets spooked them into trampling Burmese soldiers. To boost morale, Maha Bandula paraded with a golden umbrella, but this made him a target for British rockets, and he was killed on April 1st. Although victorious on the battlefield, the British failed to supply their troops, halting their advance and leading to tropical diseases. 15,000 British soldiers died in the war, but mostly due to tropical disease. In 1825, British progress in conquering Arakan and Assam was slowed by fierce Burmese resistance and the dense jungle. In November, 10,000 Burmese troops surrounded the British in a last-ditch effort, but were decimated by superior British firepower and rockets, causing their war effort to crumble. By February 1826, the Burmese agreed to peace. In the Treaty of Yandabo, they agreed to surrender the areas of Arakan, Assam, Manipur and the Tenasserim coast to the British, as well as pay £1 million in reparations. The Burmese king's diplomatic effort to regain Tenasserim was denied by the British. The Burmese king struggled with what we today call bipolar disorder and became less and less effective as a leader. Burma sought to station their diplomat in London, but the British restricted them to Calcutta, which offended the Burmese. In 1830, the British envoy won over King Boyador with his charm. By 1831, King Boyador's deteriorating mental state led the Queen to take over his duties. Burma's final Yandabo Treaty payment in 1832 impoverished the nation and caused internal conflict due to high village taxes. In 1833, Burma regained territory from Manipur, but Britain's refusal to return the Tenasserim coast and threat to sell it to Thailand created more bad blood. By 1834, Dharawati, King Boyador's brother, had become fiercely hostile to the British. By 1835, the king's mental health worsened, and the Queen, growing more powerful, placed her low-born relatives in positions of power, causing resentment at court. The Moulmein Chronicle, the first English newspaper in British-held Burma, was published. In 1837, Dharawati staged a coup which deposed King Boyador. He was placed under house arrest until his death in 1845, while the Queen and her family were executed. In 1838, the British ambassador left, claiming King Dharawati's hostility made life intolerable, with flooded living quarters in the rainy season. The king's purchase of modern muskets and cannons worried the British about war. However, he claimed they were for law and order and defense against Thailand. By 1840, all British diplomats had left Burma, which King Tarawati celebrated as a symbolic victory. The Burmese court was happy because they saw the diplomats as an insult due to them being sent from the viceroy in Calcutta and not from the British Queen. In 1841, the Burmese king's parade in Rangoon alarmed the British. They expected war. When he became king, Tharawati expanded his number of wives from 16 to 100. This became part of his downfall, as one of his new junior queens plotted against him. This drove the king into showing the same bipolar disorder that King Boyador had suffered from. The king's son now began to act in his father's place as regent. In 1844, Burmese women were banned from meeting foreigners in Rangoon. The British were furious.
In Burma's land, my love denied, a soldier's anger deep inside.
In 1845, King Tharawati's mania was so severe that he needed to be put under permanent restraint. In 1846, King Tharawati died, and his son became the new king. The new king focused on building Buddhist monasteries and pagodas. However, he allowed corruption, leading to many courtiers being killed for the enrichment of others. The British Empire was at its peak, having just won the Opium War with China and consolidating its rule over India. The British elite universally believed in the benefits of empire, promoting free trade, better government, and Christianity. Governor-General Lord Dalhousie, a staunch imperialist, was outraged by the Burmese kingdom's blatant disrespect for the British Empire. By 1849, Dalhousie was ready to subjugate Burma after quelling dissent in India. However, King Bagan, unlike his predecessors, did not provoke the British. Rangoon was teeming with British merchants and missionaries, both eager for more British control. The merchants wanted to make more money and hated Burmese regulations and taxes. The missionaries were determined to spread Christianity and convert the Burmese, whom they saw as heathens. Late 1851 saw Rangoon's port as a cesspool of smuggling. The Burmese governor tried to impose stricter fines to clean up the port, but this infuriated the British traders. 2 British captains exaggerated their plight, and Dalhousie saw an opportunity to intervene. He sent Commodore Lambert to demand £1,000 in compensation from the Burmese. In a show of force, Lambert's warships entered Rangoon, flaunting British power. The Burmese were quick to react, firing the governor and offering compensation. But Lambert's seizure of a royal ship led to explosive cannon fire and chaos. Spotting an opportunity, Dalhousie now demanded £100,000. The Burmese king was stunned, making war certain. In 1852, Britain invaded Burma, now facing a significantly weaker Burmese army than in 1824. Resistance was brief, and the British soon took Rangoon and Lower Burma. Lord Dalhousie, backed by the British government, annexed Lower Burma, joining Tenasserim with Arakan and landlocking the Burmese Empire. In 1853, King Bagan was deposed and replaced by his half-brother Mindon. King Mindon opposed war with the British Empire and tried many times to regain Lower Burma through diplomacy. Mindon became very active trying to befriend the British, but they insisted on keeping control of Lower Burma. Therefore, although fighting stopped, no peace was made. In 1854, Burmese rebels used guerrilla warfare to harass the British. This made it hard for them to control Lower Burma. King Mindon proved to be a wise statesman and modernizer. Unlike his predecessors, his rise to power didn't lead to executions of rivals. Despite feelings running high against the British, he avoided war as he knew Burma could not win. The former king was allowed to live in a stately home under house arrest and was treated with respect. King Mindon, who was a devout Buddhist and hated seeing his people suffer, tried to stop the Lower Burma insurrection against the British. When famine struck, he also sold his rice reserves to the British at a discount. The Burmese capital was officially moved to Mandalay. Since the British and Burmese empires were still officially at war, the British did not send an ambassador to King Mindon's court. Instead, King Mindon hired a Scottish merchant and 2 British officers as his personal advisors. King Mindon replaced the old barter system with a new currency. He also regulated foreign trade for tariff revenue and modernized gem mining and lumber industries. Prince Kanong, Mindon's brother, took a great interest in industry and built factories in Burma. He aimed to modernize the army by sending scholars to France and Italy to learn new techniques. Foreign merchants in Rangoon were unhappy with the Burmese king's restrictions in Upper Burma. They sought free travel and trade. They viewed Burma as a gateway to China. In 1862, a trade treaty allowed British merchants to trade freely in Upper Burma. Although the British also granted Burmese access to Lower Burma, Burma did not really have any capitalists who could benefit. It was a very unequal treaty and was mostly a goodwill gesture by King Mindon towards the British. The Bombay-Burma Trading Corporation, owned by a Scotsman, secured a lucrative timber concession in 1863. British merchants had long wanted Burma's teak resources and were now finally tapping into them. A railway concession was granted to a British firm in 1864. This would allow Britain to build a railway to China. In 1865, the Burmese kingdom was in financial crisis due to heavy spending on the palace and army, as well as reduced income from lost lands. The British also pushed for lower import duties. Efforts by the king and Kanong to boost tax revenue caused unrest. King Mindon's choice of his brother Kanong as his successor was resented by King Mindon's sons. Their ambition and the social unrest combined to incite a rebellion. In August 1866, 2 of King Mindon's sons stormed a council meeting. They brutally decapitated their uncle, Prince Kanong. They then paraded his head on a spike around the palace. King Mindon, who had been supervising a pagoda construction outside Mandalay, re-entered the city with loyalist officers. They battled the princes and their allies inside the palace. In the heat of battle, the princes realized that they couldn't succeed in killing their father. Defeated and bloodstained, they fled, taking one of the king's ships down the Irrawaddy River. The 2 princes raised an army and fought their way north again. Additionally, one of Kanong's sons also rebelled against King Mindon. Fighting on 2 fronts, Mindon used new steamships to move his troops effectively, securing victory in October 1866. In 1867, Burma made another trade deal with Britain, which ended royal monopolies in favor of free trade. In exchange, the Burmese could buy modern weapons from British merchants in Rangoon. After the death of Kanong, King Mindon took less interest in reform, but reform was not dead. Now some of the scholars who had studied abroad came back to Burma and became part of the government. The Myosa of Pyongyang, educated at the Sorbonne in Paris, continued Kanong's work of industrializing Burma. But the most important reformer was the de facto prime minister, Kinwun Mingji. He was a determined modernizer who aimed to create a Burmese government centered around ministers rather than the royal court. He believed this change was crucial to maintaining Burma's independence. In 1870, a telegraph line was established between Mandalay and Rangoon. In 1871, Kinwon Minji went on a European tour, which included Italy and France. He signed treaties with these countries. In London, he met Queen Victoria, but the Burmese wish to have an ambassador in London was still denied. This was now a double insult, as Britain had already allowed Thailand to have an ambassador in London. Burma was being treated as a third-rate power. In 1872, the Irrawaddy Flotilla Company, owned by British merchants, established a trade route to China via Burma. In 1873, a rebellion broke out in Karenni State. King Mindon tried to suppress it, but the British, eyeing the teak-rich area, opportunistically supported the rebels. Struggling with low finances, King Mindon found it difficult to resist British demands for Karenni independence. In 1875, to appease the British, King Mindon granted independence to Karenni State. The British diplomat then raised the shoe question. He objected to the cultural practice of removing his shoes before the Burmese king. He wanted to keep his shoes on, which was a massive sign of disrespect for Burmese tradition and beliefs. King Mindon, growing old and weak, feared appointing a successor would lead to another assassination, as happened with his brother. In 1877, as King Mindon fell ill with dysentery, succession plots emerged. Kinwon Minji desired a weak king for greater control and modernization, while a powerful court faction favored the king's younger son, Thibor. In 1878, Kinwon Minji and Thibor's faction joined forces and set a plan in motion as King Mindon lay dying. Thibor, in love with his ambitious half-sister, Supayolat, saw her have other royals arrested and killed. Kinwon Minji allowed the bloodbath to secure Thibor's rule. Supayolat rose to become a very powerful queen. She made Thibor monogamous, which was totally new, as Burmese kings usually had many wives. She also resisted the modernizing ministers. She opposed limits on royal power and spending, because she wanted to reward her court favorites lavishly. By 1880, Burma's finances were poor. Poor cotton harvests and British free trade undercut local manufacturing. Supayolat and Thibor introduced a state lottery to compensate, which put many into debt. In 1880, the state lottery had to be abolished. In 1881, Burma tried to renegotiate the free trade treaty with Britain to impose more import duties, but negotiations failed. This failure ended Kinwon Minji's influence, as Thibor remained under Queen Supayolat's strong influence. After Britain refused to renegotiate the trade treaty, Queen Supayolat sought a deal with France. The intense colonial competition between Britain and France, both expanding in Africa and Asia, made this move arouse British suspicion. In 1883, French military advisors were invited to help modernize the Burmese army, introducing European drill practices and tactics. With Lower Burma lost, Upper Burma had to import rice. Poor harvests led to sharp price increases, causing unrest and lawlessness. Bandits controlled the countryside and Mandalay's suburbs. Meanwhile, the court still held lavish feasts. By 1885, Upper Burma's famine and breakdown in law and order pushed immigrants to British territory. Britain wanted war. They used the fine imposed against the British-owned Bombay-Burma Trading Corporation as justification. Britain demanded the fine be cancelled and total control over Burma's foreign relations. Burma had to refuse this to maintain its independence. At this time, the British Secretary of State for India was Randolph Churchill, father of the famous Winston Churchill. During a general election campaign, Randolph Churchill believed a quick colonial war with Burma would boost the Conservative government's chances, and he decided to go to war.
The sun shall never set on the British Empire.
Attacking with steamers up the Irrawaddy River, the British avoided dense jungle terrain. The Burmese, unprepared and surprised by the speed of the advance, offered limited resistance.
We are on the road to Mandalay. Aye, mate, on the road to Mandalay.
British propaganda, claiming to liberate the Burmese from King Thibaw, further weakened resistance. They also tricked the Burmese by parading a fake prince. This made some Burmese people think the invaders were only there to help a new Burmese king onto the throne. After just 2 weeks, the British reached Mandalay, where King Thibaw quickly surrendered. The British auctioned off vast amounts of weapons and ammunition found inside the palace. Thibaw and Subayolat were exiled to India.
Right, chaps, we are staying. God save the Queen.
At the beginning of 1886, Randolph Churchill presented Queen Victoria with a new gift. She was now the ruler of all of Burma. Instead of installing a new king, the British decided to annex the entire country, making Burma part of British India. Former Burmese soldiers, angered by British deception about installing a new king and driven by nationalism, began a guerrilla war against the British. The British kept 20,000 colonial troops in Upper Burma and built new prisons for thousands of rebels. To break the rebels, the British burnt rebel villages and forcefully relocated their sympathizers. In 1890, Rudyard Kipling published a poem that would become the most famous poem in all of world history. The poem was about Burma, the road to Mandalay.
By the old Moulmein Pagoda looking lazy at the sea, there's a Burma girl a-settin', and I know she thinks of me, for the wind is in the palm trees and the temple bells they say, "Come you back, you British soldier, come you back to Mandalay."
Come you back to Mandalay where the old flotilla lay. Can't you hear their paddles chunking from Rangoon to Mandalay, on the road to Mandalay, where the flying fishes play, and the dawn comes up like thunder out of China, cross the bay?
Her petticoat was yaller, and her little cap was green, and her name was Subayolat, just the same as Thebaw's queen, and I seed her first a-smoking of a whacking white cheroot, and a-wasting Christian kisses on an even idol's foot. Bloomin' idol made of mud, what they called the great gourd bud plucky lot. She cared for idols when I kissed her where she stud.
Ship me somewheres east of Suez, where the best is like the worst, where there aren't no 10 commandments, and a man can raise a thirst, for the temple bells are calling, and it's there that I would be by the old Moulmein Pagoda, looking lazy at the sea.
In 1891, major irrigation works were undertaken to improve Burmese agriculture, and the railway from Rangoon to Mandalay was completed. In 1892, British businesses started to exploit Burma's mineral wealth. The once royal monopoly on ruby mines was now part of the free market. In 1893, with Burma now part of India, Indians freely traveled there. Many became moneylenders or laborers, causing resentment among the indigenous Burmese. In 1894, Burma Oil became another British company exploiting Burma's natural resources for significant profit. In 1895, construction began on St. Mary's Catholic Cathedral in Rangoon. In 1896, Rangoon, under British rule, became a cosmopolitan center. British, Indian, and Chinese capitalists formed a new elite. At the other end of the social scale, Indian laborers were drawn to the higher living standards. In 1897, Sir Frederick Fryer was appointed Chief Commissioner for Burma. The British Empire promoted Western-style education in Burma, focusing on government and Christian schools, gradually replacing Buddhist monastery schools. By 1899, the improvement in Burmese agriculture had turned Burma into the world's largest rice exporter. Colonial Rangoon was culturally diverse. 55% of Rangoon were Indian, 30% were native Burmese, and the rest were Chinese, Armenian, and Jewish. British administrators who held the top positions congregated at the whites-only Pegu Club. The Strand Hotel, built by the Armenian Sarkis brothers, who also built the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, opened in Rangoon in 1901. Despite British vaccinations, thousands of Burmese people died from the bubonic plague that killed 15 million in India in the early 1900s. Burma's economic prosperity did not benefit the native Burmese, who felt exploited by Indian moneylenders and undercut by Indian laborers. The British only allowed minorities like the Kachin and the Karen to serve in the army. As young Burmese men struggled to compete with Indian migrants for jobs, many turned to crime. In 1905, the Secretariat building, the seat of British power in Burma, was completed in Rangoon. The Young Men's Buddhist Association, also called the YMBA, was established in 1906 to promote Buddhist values. Initially, it focused on religion, art, and literature. Later, it would shift to political activism against British rule. In 1907, the Grand Sophia building, constructed by Jewish businessmen from Baghdad, opened in downtown Yangon. By 1908, the Burmese were marginalized in all aspects of life. Europeans and other Asians controlled the economy. British officials governed from the Secretariat and the Pegu Club, and missionaries spread Christianity, diminishing Buddhism. This led to growing Burmese nationalism. Ironically, one of the early Buddhist preachers who criticized the spread of Christianity in Burma was U Dhammaloka, an Irish-born migrant worker who had converted to Buddhism and traveled around Burma preaching against Christianity. In 1910, the British convicted U Dhammaloka for his anti-Christian preaching, which they felt undermined British rule. In 1911, the YMBA demanded Buddhist education in schools, believing that neglecting Buddhism caused issues like theft, murder, and alcoholism. They set up many schools fostering Burmese nationalism. In 1912, the shoe question became a major nationalist issue, as the British refusal to take off their shoes in pagodas insulted Burmese culture. Traditional Burmese people found it controversial when women began wearing imported Western clothes. Before 1914, the German community was the largest Western group in Rangoon after the British. This changed with the outbreak of World War I. In 1915, Burmese soldiers were deployed to Mesopotamia to fight against the Ottoman Empire. Burmese nationalists were inspired by the 1916 Easter Rising in Ireland, hoping for their own freedom from British rule. In 1917, a British commission explored self-rule in India, but deliberately excluded Burma, assuming the Burmese were happy with direct British rule. The Spanish flu reached Burma in 1918, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Inspired by Gandhi's resistance to colonial rule in India, Burmese nationalists grew more determined. In 1920, Rangoon University opened and Burmese students went on strike to protest having only British professors. Love and Liquor, the first Burmese feature film, premiered in Rangoon in 1921. Throughout the 1920s, Burma's film industry became one of the most vibrant and prosperous in Asia. One of the richest men in Burma, Chinese businessman Lim Chin Chong, built the magnificent Chin Chong Palace in Rangoon before his death in 1923. In 1923, George Orwell worked as a police officer in Burma. He stayed for 5 years and wrote the book Burmese Days. In this book, he heavily criticized British colonialism and its negative impact on both the Burmese and the British.
The sooner we leave this country, the better.